So, good afternoon and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee, which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield. This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. So the first item on the agenda today is the minutes. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January 2023 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. Question time, we have no questions. Question asked by members, I haven't received no questions. There are no urgent items. Does any member have any declarations of interest they wish to make?
I suppose usual one, Chair.
Yeah.
Don't think anything on the agenda that covers it, but I'll make it anyway.
Yep. So that's as a Lloyds Bank pensioner. Yep. We've received no pension, no petitions. We've received no pension. We've received no petitions. We've received no petitions. So item 7, moving to the external audit of the 21-22 statement of accounts, annual government statement and pension fund. We have with us Nick Walsh, Head of Finance, to introduce this item. So over to you, Nick.
It's already on. So yeah, the purpose of this report is to present the key findings from the external audit of the 2021-22 financial statements and seek the committee's approval to the letters of representation, which are appendices D and E to the report. In a moment, I'll hand over to Mark Stocks, the audit partner from Grant Thornton, to go through the findings into the committee in some detail. But just very briefly, a bit of background. So the audit of the accounts of 21-22 was due to complete at the end of November 22, but because of the national issue with the accounting for infrastructure on highways assets, which resulted in the statutory guidance being issued on Christmas Day, and the associated work to reflect those updates in the accounts, that we had to delay that audit. And just as a kind of follow-up to that, in terms of the infrastructure, we'd previously kind of based our depreciation of assets over 40 years, which is still permitted, but as a result of the requirements, we were required to add a additional disclosure to the auditor as part of the changes that came about as a result of that introduction. There has been a significant increase in auditor testing, stemming from the increased requirements placed on auditors from their regulators. Significant more work on both sides this year as a result of that, which is kind of part of the reasons why things have taken longer as well. As mentioned in paragraph 6, the audit is almost complete. There is one outstanding issue on asset valuations, which has not yet been fully completed. It's not expected to be a material issue, and as a result, basically, if there are any changes to the auditor's report that come out of that, then obviously we will notify the chair accordingly. But as I say, we're not expecting it to have a bit of material impact. After this meeting, the accounts get presented to the Council's Constitution Committee on the 21st of March to be signed. And then after that, the auditor could then sign them. There are 3 reports from the external auditor. And just very briefly, the annual auditor's report, that's the detailed review of the value for money arrangements at the council. Overall, it seems pretty positive. There are a few improvement recommendations that are made, and there's further details in terms of the management responses to those in paragraph 16 of the report onwards. The audit findings report is the detailed review of the County Council's own financial statements. There were 2 material issues identified and a number of smaller potential issues as well. The material issues, one related to the treatment of the accounting of Academy School land, and also there was a correction required into the way the netting off of creditor and debtor balances. Neither of these issues affected the usable balances of the council, and both items have been corrected into the financial statements. There are also some other smaller issues identified, which are explained in the report from paragraph 45. Audit fees have increased by 25k from those that were previously advised, and that is down to the additional work required and to undertake the additional work, and also the various corrections that were required. The detailed audit review of the pension fund statement is the final attachment from the auditor. There was one adjustment identified here of just under 8 million, but it was not material and it hasn't been corrected for in the accounts. It related to the need to use estimates at the time the draft accounts were required to be prepared. There are also a number of other smaller issues identified from paragraph 56 onwards. In terms of the pension fund, the audit fees were held at the same level as previously advised at the time of the audit plan. So that was all I was going to say, Chair. So
thanks very much.
Hand over to Mark and welcome him.
So we've got Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton, who are the council's external auditors. And so welcome, Mark, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I get the feeling I'm going to do a lot of talking over the next sort of, well, as long as you keep me here. So because there's lots of reports here. So the first report is the annual auditor's report. Members will be aware that the National Audit Office changed the way that we report now. We used to do the value for money conclusion on an exception basis. So we just told you if there's anything significant. So what the annual auditor's report is supposed to do is supposed to outline our views, my views, in terms of where you are in terms of your financial sustainability, your governance, and your economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So I will guide you through the report. I'll give you the highlights, and then I'm going to pause and then take any questions that you have. So if I could take members to page 23. So in my parlance, this is a positive report. You know, you're a large organisation. I would be surprised if any of these judgments were green, just because, you know, there's always going to be something happening within an organisation like this in sort of a recommendation for us to make. But, you know, where you have to worry is where I'm kind of reporting reds and I'm going, there are significant weaknesses, which I'm not for Leicestershire. So I think that's a positive. Just moving over onto page 24, and it gets to the overall conclusions here. So in terms of the finances, I think the council's got, you know, a strong track record in terms of its finances. That's always a positive for me as auditor. There's two areas that I'll flag both now and as we go into a bit more depth in the report. One is just about the level of savings that you're going to have to make over the next few years. I think that's a significant challenge to you and to local government in general. And then, you know, the DSG debt deficit's now coming into around sort of £40 million. So that's a lot of money that that's going to have to be recovered unless the government starts to give you some funding. But overall, you know, with those two caveats, I'm comfortable with where you are in terms of financial sustainability. In terms of governance, there's not and the 3 E's, there's not any significant weaknesses that I want to report. So again, I'll come back to those as I go into a bit more depth. But that is a good place to be in terms of where we're of how we view you. So just going on to page 27. So page 27 onwards deals with financial sustainability. You know, I'm looking back at 21-22 now. So I think for all of the councils, it was another COVID year. I think it was a difficult year for you. So, but you know, I was comfortable with where you ended, and you ended with a substantial level of reserves. And so, if you look at page 28, what we're highlighting is where you sort of stand in terms of your level of reserves in comparison to other councils. So again. So, you know, I thought that was a positive sort of message for you in terms of the reserves are standing at a reasonable level. Just turning the page onto page 29. This deals with the medium term, you know, financial plan. So, and you know, you already have seen the reports from the Director of Finance in terms of your finances. There's a significant level of savings to be made, sort of circa 90 million between now and 2026. It's a lot of money that you're going to have to save. you have needed to use reserves in 22-23, but you do have a balanced position for 23-24 in terms of what you're trying to actually achieve. But you still have to make £13 million of savings in 23-24 to break even. So, it's a lot of money to save. So, and one of the things we talk about when we talk about reserves is that you can't get into the habit of using them on a recurrent basis. So it has to be on a non-recurrent basis to get you over the current crisis. So some things to think about there. Just moving on to page 31, we talk a lot about the direct school grant, so the dedicated schools grant. And just the impact of SEND on that program. And I know you've got consultants in at the moment looking at that. So that's a positive, and that. Chris and I had a conversation about, well, should this be a significant risk to the councils? Should this be something that I rated? But, given the work that Newton are doing and where you're trying to get to, we decided that, appropriate management arrangements were in place. But it is an area that, I think you need to focus on going forwards. Moving down to page 33, talk a little bit about capital. I think overall capital is well managed. Most of local government suffers an area of slippage. There are some impacts now, perhaps more than there had been previously in terms of, capital costs going up. So every time you slip, then things become more expensive. But you'll see the graph. We tend to look at your level of indebtedness overall. So you can see that your level of indebtedness has been kept low by your Director of Finance over the years, and that is a really positive place to be. So we do look at that quite a lot. So moving down, there are some recommendations, and no surprises in terms of those recommendations. It's around closing the budget gaps. It's around taking actions around the DSG, the SEND deficit. So those are the two improvement recommendations that we've made. So moving down then onto governance. So we look, I suppose, in depth really at governance for councils, and one of the things we tend to focus on is what we call tone from the top. So so what's the messages, what's the culture? Is that appropriate? And then we sort of move from there on to, well, how's the council managing risk? So, and does it have an appropriate internal audit and counter fraud function, and is it doing the right things? So in all of those, I was comfortable with where the council was. There are some improvement recommendations from page 40 onwards, but for me, they're rather low-level improvement recommendations. There's nothing that I was particularly concerned about with that. I'm going to move you down now to economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So this is quite a comprehensive look at the council. It's called efficiency, economy and effectiveness, but it covers a vast array of areas, all the way from sort of your corporate planning through to your performance, through your benchmarking, to how services are performing, all the way through to procurement. So we do look in a lot more detail now than perhaps we used to previously. So in terms of what's on page 43, you have the council strategic plan that's been refreshed. So you've got a new one in place now that was launched in February, and you have appropriate performance indicators to see where your services are performing. And that sounds like something every council should have, but that's not what I'm saying to every council. So for some councils, I'm going, you need to do more in terms of performance. So on the bottom of page 43, we start to look a little bit in more detail at adult social care, and you'll see in the last two paragraphs, there's a couple of positives there, sort of in terms of how they, so in the last three paragraphs in terms of sort of, where you are in terms of performance, but we have highlighted, around some issues around social contact for carers. And then there's sort of which has decreased, and then the number of sort of permanent care admissions is also going up for the number of people going into residential care. So a few areas to look at adult social care, but nothing that I was particularly concerned about. Children's on page 44, I think was more mixed. So you'll see we've highlighted some areas to improve around child protection plans and sort of how you're sort of, working on child protection cases. It is an area I think for you to continue to focus on. But, I'd be surprised if you weren't making any recommendations in terms of children's. Just moving down then, page 445, we do some benchmarking. So, so in terms of how you benchmark, in terms of your cost, you benchmark, quite low in terms of your expenditure. So in terms of you sort of, getting a good outcome for your pound, that's very strong. There's an outlier in terms of planning. Chris, to be fair, said, well, that's a really small service in comparison to everything else. I thought that was a fair comment, but I've left it in there because, compared to everything else you do, planning sort of a little bit expensive. So perhaps something to think about. So as my only comment on the costs is that you need to balance low costs against sort of the quality of the services you're providing. So, you need to kind of look back at the sort of the quality indicators that we were talking about to kind of go, well, is that where you want to be? Going to move down now to page 47. So we've done a little bit. We looked at your complaints policy and your service user feedback. So, number of complaints have gone up. So perhaps something for you to think about, and particularly around adult social care. So maybe there's something to take forward there. And then last two bits from me. Page 48. You've got a number of sort of joint ventures, a number of kind of commercial ventures. I think the biggest one that's going to come is going to be the Freeport. So that's new. So we've not looked at it in a lot of detail for 21-22, but that will bring risk to the council going forward, and so we will look at that more. And then finally on page 49, page 50. We just highlight some procurement metrics, and the council has some really strong procedures and policies in terms of its procurement. So the thing I'm flagging to you is that the number of waivers, so which go outside of that process, is actually increased over the past couple of years. Officers are aware and are actively working on it, but it is an area that you need to feel secure in terms of what's happening. So for avoidance of doubt, so this is a good news report from your auditor. So we know auditors by their nature kind of look in detail, and they there's a lot of good here in terms of where you are. There are some improvement recommendations, but inevitably I would always expect that. I'll pause there and pass back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Has anybody got any questions? I think, as Mark said, it's a fairly positive audit, that there are recommendations for improvement, but as in previous years, we will take those up. There doesn't appear to be any major problem with governance. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Mr. Richardson.
So if we start with recommendation 2, it's almost a slightly illogical recommendation because it lies against government policy. So government policies are saying we have to run the deficit balance off balance sheet because they're not going to fund it and they don't know how they're going to fund it. You're then saying we should make savings to account for it, which is diametrically opposed to government policy, who've just extended the scheme for a further 3 years. So is it sensible to make a recommendation which is contrary to government policy? I mean, if the recommendation was, yes, you need to have money for this, and The problem you've got is the government's idiotic policy on how you account for it. I could understand it, but that's not what you said in the report. You've actually said it's down to us to achieve this when it's government policy that's achieving that. Is one. If we then go further down, and it might be for officers to cover, where we talk about information. I'm quite a fan of the Pentana system, so I just wonder if we made further inroads in putting it out across the council, because the one thing Pentana will do is it will provide all members with instant access to information just by going through their laptop, which would be brilliant for members and actually would strengthen the corporate governance, because members would have information going forward. And the third comment I would make is, particularly you talked about adults communities, about the residents saying they don't get enough contact time. Well, they don't, because we haven't got the money. So surely you should have looked at the context of contact time in the context of the money we have vis-a-vis others who throw money at this and therefore will get a better rating, but they're funded massively better. And I don't see any contextual relationship in this audit report to the funding of Leicestershire vis-a-vis other councils, and therefore how well we're actually doing with the money we've got. So in the context of the report, I would have thought it should have said Leicestershire are doing brilliantly because you're doing far better than any other council who's got twice as much money. You're actually performing worse, which it doesn't.
Oh, over to you, Mark.
I'll take them in turn. So in terms of the DSG question, so that's not my responsibility. Governance policy is not my responsibility. My responsibility is to make sure that you're safe financially. So there's a reality that you're overspending on schools. So and that's real money. You know, so if that statutory override wasn't there, you would have £40 million less in the bank. So at some point, somebody has to pay that. Now, do I believe the government's going to give you £40 million? No, I don't, to be candid. So there's a reality that you, as a council and officers, have to make strides in terms of resolving that. So there's no point in me kind of going, oh, well, it's the government policy, it's all okay. It's not okay. It's something that you need to take action on, and that's why the recommendation there is there. So I think in terms of risk and Pentana, I will defer to Chris on that, so I'll let him in a minute. So the adult social care one, again, you know, you will not be assessed on whether you had sufficient money. You will be assessed on whether you're providing the right level of care. So you have to make the financial decisions in terms of, you know, what you set in council tax, what you use from reserves, which services you prioritise. And you have to make adult social care safe. So you know, for me, I don't come at it in terms of funding from the government. I come at it from what's your responsibility, and are you fulfilling those responsibilities?
But thanks for that, Mark. Chris.
I'm going to defer to Neil on the Pentana one because you're closer to it. But just picking up the kind of low cost issue. I mean, in some ways, I was quite pleased it showed that we were low cost and it was independently very, because that means we're low funded, doesn't it? I mean, they're the same thing. They're just different ways of showing it. But the other thing I was going to add to it, they haven't done this for a while, but there was a consultancy firm called Empower who used to rank the most efficient councils in the country, and we always used to come up. We came top 3 years in a row because we do get good outcomes, and we're the lowest funded council, of course, Penny Power in the county council in the country. So generally, our outcomes are pretty good, and particularly given that we are the lowest funded, they are kind of very good. Hence why we got that highest rating. Unfortunately, Empower haven't done it for a couple of years, but I did have a word with them the other week to see whether they could start doing it again.
Yeah.
Build that in.
Okay. So yep. Sorry, Susan.
And I think that was the point I was trying to make, Chris, that if you're a member of the public looking at this auditor's report, there is no context around it vis-a-vis other councils. All right, there's a couple of graphs that show assets and spending, what we're spending compared to anyone else. So with that context, a member of the public would look at that and think, well, hold on. Yes, they're spending less on this. They got adults, people want more contact time. Surely it's got to make some recognition of that. I appreciate what you're saying, you're only measuring against outcomes, but you're also putting Leicestershire audit report out there in the context of all other reports. And therefore it's got to be on a contextual basis of the funding that we get and how we spend that funding. Otherwise, any member of the public looking at this will just look at this in isolation and say, well, they're not doing very well. Whereas the actual opposite is true, as Chris has just identified, that we're doing really well with the money we've got and we're making it go further than other councils. So should there not be something in the audit report about, and particularly in the value for money bit, about how much better we do out of the little bit of money that we've got than others?
Mark.
Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to do, because I imagine if you put the Empower statistics in front of any council or any auditor or anybody, they would just dispute them, because you have to imagine that I have any number of these conversations. So pretty much then everybody thinks they're underfunded. Everybody thinks they ought to have more. So it's we just don't take that line. So we look at the outputs and go, what does this mean for you? And then it's for you as politicians to make the decision as to what you want to do about it.
Thanks, Mark. Now, the Pentana system is a risk management system, if I'm not mistaken. And
it is, yes, Chair. Thank you. So we did look at Pentana, a corporate management team. I think probably well before COVID, if you remember, Chris, and we'd realised the benefits of it then. So Pentana had been built as a standalone by one of the departments, not for risk management actually, but for an offshoot of risk of their sort of staff performance routines. So we did look at it, and at the time it was a period of much upheaval, and it was sort of parked for a while. When the external auditor did their value for money assessment, what we said was, and it's in the auditor's report, is that we would look at it by considering a business case of all alternative solutions, not necessarily Pentana. I take Mr. Richardson's point about it is very useful and it is multi-user, but we'd widen that out in the auditor's report to say that we would look at forming a business case about what is the best solution.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, has anybody else got any questions? No? Okay. Mark, do you want to say anything else? Have you got anything else you want to say? No? 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 Okay, well, I think it's a very comprehensive report. Certainly there's a massive amount of work gone into it compared to previous years. The outturn is pretty positive. It has identified all the risks, and there's a clear risk. 2 or 3 years hence, what are we going to do with a deficit opening up? And that's very fair comment. But I think people can take quite a lot of assurance from this report. I don't want it to be famous last words, because usually when you say something like that, a hole opens up and you sink into it. But if there are no other questions, the committee is asked to note the auditor's findings set out in the annual report, which are very clear, and the things that need action will be implemented through an action plan, and to approve the draft letters of representation. Can I ask, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now, we haven't finished yet, but the date of the next meeting of the corporate governance will be
I didn't answer correct.
That's not what
You take as long as you like, Mark. I'm afraid there's nobody waiting for me. So we're carrying on.
Apologies. So the other two reports I've got on the agenda. There's one around the county council's account, and then there's one around the pension funds account, because you're the responsible body. So if I could take you to page 65. So the audit of the county's financial statements is pretty much concluded. So we've only got one item left to just work through. I don't think that will actually adjust the financial statements. And I just like to put on record my thanks to Jason Firth and Dan Menner just for their support throughout the audit. They've been absolutely fantastic. So I think that's just important to note. So in terms of, going to page 65, so in terms of audit findings, probably the biggest thing that we've agreed with officers is just a change in the valuation of land that's transferred to academies. So the land is technically still yours. It's still, it's leased land. So, for 125 years. So, but in reality, will you ever get that back? What's the value to you now of that land? Because you're not using it, the academies are. So we've agreed that there ought to be an adjustment to that land. So that's quite a big adjustment. Does it impact on how you operate as a council? No, because the academies had already gone. Does it sort of slightly change how your balance sheet looks? Yeah, yes, it does. Then the other significant amendment was around debtors and creditors, and your ledger, and I'll come back to this, is perhaps sort of a little more complex than I'm used to. So, and you sort of managed debits and credits in a particular way, and then unfortunately, when the accounts have been consolidated from the ledger, there's been a netting off of debtors and creditors. So, and quite a sizable one. So, but that's been adjusted now. So we're comfortable that debtors and creditors look how they ought to. So, and then there's some other sort of minor areas sort of that we're just flagging. There's an impact in terms of pension valuation, but none of these are significant. Was an issue in terms of how you de-recognised two of the academies. So they should have been de-recognised last year, but have been de-recognised this year. So I think there's just a bit of housekeeping in terms of how you manage academy schools sort of going forward. So that's the highlights. In terms of how we approach the audit, then we approach it in terms of significant risk. So I can take members to page 70. Because we're auditors, we talk a lot about management override of control. That's the ability of management to misrepresent their financial statements. So we look at sort of accounting estimates. We look in particularly at journals in terms of how they're operated. Your journal controls are actually quite good in comparison to most councils. Most councils don't have any review of their journals. So, but you authorise anything above 20,000. So, and actually the number of journals below 20,000 is only sort of circa about 5 million in value. So I was reasonably comfortable in terms of journals. I think there is some recommendations that I'll just take you to in a bit. But then in terms of estimates or unusual transactions within the financial statements, there's nothing that I need to bring to your attention. So just turning the page, we look a lot at revenue recognition. That's sort of, how do you bring sort of your income to account? So we found some sort of minor sort of issues. So wasn't quite sure the credit loss allowance was sufficiently large. So and then when we looked at sort of the completeness of income was in the right period, we found like a minor overstatement of 87,000 that sort of extrapolates to a bigger figure of around 1 million. So the reason we report these figures to you is because it's proper income. It's like, it would impact on reserves if we put those adjustments through. But, for a council of your size, I'm not particularly concerned. It's just something, particularly the credit loss allowance, that I'll be working with officers on over the next year to make sure that's the right value. So just turning on to page 74, we spend a lot of time on valuations nowadays. Our regulators are very keen that your valuations are right. So, and then sort of page 73, 74, we just talk you through in more detail the changes in terms of Academy School and the derecognition issues. So I'm happy to take questions on those, but I wasn't going to say particularly more. And then turning to page 76, again, the big estimate in your financial statements is pensions. And sort of the assets within the pension fund valuation were had changed by about 8 million, which impacts on your accounts by about 2.3 million. So nothing major, but just something to note. Page 77 deals with infrastructure. So that was the cause celeb. So at Christmas time, we're waiting for that. Again, we've dealt with that now, and I'm comfortable with how your infrastructure's accounted for even. So, and then on page 79 and 80, so we just highlight some areas around how you manage your ledger, so which is slightly different to what we see elsewhere. So that's something I will be discussing with officers, because you do there's quite a lot of accounting codes there. There's quite a lot of journals that do go through some really big journals in terms of cash accounting. So there's one for around 25 billion, which is sort of unusual in terms of what to see elsewhere. So there's some things I think just to look at in terms of ledger management going forward, and that continues onto page 80. Page 81 gives you more detail on the debtors and creditors issue, but again, I'm not going to talk you through that in any more detail unless you want me to. So I'm then down to page 96. So page 96 just highlights a number of recommendations. So that deals with how you deal with academy schools, so what you're doing on your ledger, and then sort of it just runs through disposals and credit loss allowances and just some thoughts on journals. So my officers have responded, are going to respond to those. So finally then from me on page 100, you can see the adjustments that have been put through the accounts for the academy land and for the debtors and creditors. And then on page 102, you can see the unadjusted errors that are still within the financial statements. I'm going to pause there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. So it would be my intention, there's a bit more file review for me to do, and then there's the single issue in terms of assets that we need to resolve. But apart from that, I would intend to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statements.
Thank you, Mark. Have any members got any questions or queries on what's been said? No? Nobody got it? Yep. But that's 211 million. I think what's actually happened is that they've revalued. In other words, because the 125-year lease, they've written down the value of the land in our balance sheet to £1. So the land is still there, the asset is still there. We have leased out to the Academy Trusts over a period of 125 years the land, and therefore for the next 125 years we can't really count it as an asset. So it's the asset is still there, it's leased out, we still own it, but the auditors have deemed to write the value down to £1. So nothing materially has changed apart from they've revalued the asset down to virtually the freehold of the land has more or less been, although it isn't, it's been given to the Academy Trust for 125 years. I'll now ask the professionals to tell me that I'm completely wrong. All right, Mark.
I thought that was perfect, Chair. I'm not going to add anything, to be honest, unless the member has any more questions. That's exactly right. So we, when you're doing valuation, we sort of look for, well, who has the rights and obligations over an asset. So at the moment, the academy schools have all the rights of use. They're using it every day. They have the obligations to maintain it. So in reality, for the next 125 years, so there's no value to the council of that, because it just can't use that land. It's not there for you to make a decision to use it in a different way. It's entirely at the gift of the academies. So that's why we've agreed with officers to reduce the value to £1.
Mr. Walter.
Values go up in price from year after year. So I don't know the numbers given to the academies. X amount of money in that year. 125 years' time, that land will do an awful lot more. But it's not shown on the books. It doesn't seem logical to me that you give it somebody for £1 when you know it's worth a great deal more than that, even though you can't use it from 25 years.
Yeah. I suppose, put simply, if you have a house, say, worth 300,000 and you lease it out for 125 years, you are then precluded from doing anything with that land, selling it, doing anything, and therefore, to you, for the next 125 years, it is not worth a lot. But in 125 years, you're quite right, the value might be over 10 times as high, so you might end up having a house worth 3 million, but you won't be here anyhow, and neither will any of us. But yeah, I do understand that the land is still there. It is still owned by the council. They have more or less done away with their freehold rights by leasing out for 125 years. But it is a difficult concept to understand. But I think we couldn't, if we were to sell those assets, we would sell them subject to a 125-year lease, and nobody would really be wanting that.
Right. Now, the question is, if the school was to decide to close,
Yeah,
what happens to the land value then?
it's still the Academy Trust would still be obligated under their lease. I don't know the terms of the lease, so they may well have to make a small thing. Look, I'll let Declan explain. It's probably fine.
But I'll try and pick up two bits. One, it is an unusual scenario because normally if you were to lease something, you'd get a consideration for it, some money back, but we don't with the academies. And that's probably why it doesn't make sense in terms of common sense thinking, because normally if you rent something out, the value goes up. Actually, your rent tends to go up as well, but that doesn't happen in this scenario. No matter the value of that land, the academy is not paying us anything. So that's probably why it's always going to feel not intuitive. The second piece about what happens if the academy shuts, it kind of depends what happens next, because you've got a chain of, do we get another operator to come in and operate it's kind of, an academy or a free school? If it's how the school's no longer viable, it does come back to us at that point, and then we have conversations with the DFE about what we do with the land.
Is it what value?
We'd come back onto our balance sheet then, and a sort of the full value. It depends what's going to happen with the site, because obviously if you've got a school that's no use, it's suddenly a liability. So it all very much depends what's going to happen next. What tends to happen as well is you get in a conversation with the DFE, who don't let you just sell it for any sort of purpose we want. It's got to be sold and the consideration come back for a sort of an education purpose. So it's a hard one to answer, because it's all about what's going to happen after the academy shuts. That's what's determining the value. But it's not going to be intuitive, because you wouldn't give me a 125-year lease on a bit of land without any money coming back in. So, or maybe you would. We can talk afterwards.
Look, I understand, Phil. I understand your question. I understand exactly what you're saying, but at the moment, it isn't written in at any value. But if what you suggest happened, they give up the lease or something like that, and as Declan has said, it depends. But you could look at it as a hidden asset, but I don't want to screw the waters by going any further. £1 is what we're valued at in the accounts.
I think the easiest way to be honest is you owned a company, you said somebody wanted to sell my company to you. Said, oh, but things leased out. Things of this potential nature is like negligible. So nobody would pay you £211 million for your company. They'd go, well, I'm not going to get any benefit from that for 125 years. So essentially, you might have £200, but that's the period. So it comes back, but when it does come back, it's making sense for people like us. How you evaluate, but that's the benefit of the DFE to do that.
Would you increase?
Can you just use the microphone? Can you just use the microphones if you're going to talk? If you're going to talk, just use your microphone, because otherwise it doesn't get captured. No, that's all right. That's all right. So, Mark, do you want to carry on where you left off?
I'm going to move on to your pension fund accounts now, Chair, if I may. So this is the last one, I promise. So if I take you down to page 109, so the audit of the pension fund is complete. It's gone extremely well. So again, my thanks to officers of that. In terms of highlights, so if I take you to page 112, that just deals with a significant risk in terms of management override of control. There's nothing else to report to you other than the journal control that we were talking about earlier. And then just if I can just take you down to page 114. So obviously the pension fund just has significant levels of assets. It has billions of pounds of assets, and we categorize those into level 1, 2, and 3. So level 1s are the ones that are traded and they're easily sort of valued. Level 2 are the ones where there's some observable inputs in terms of a level of trading of those. And then level 3 are the really hard to value ones, are the ones that are only privately traded, and so we have to rely on accounts. So we were provided with the right evidence there. So the only thing that's happened is that some of these accounts are at December, so there's obviously a period between then and sort of March. So the December value was put in, but the actual value come March 2022 was about £8 million higher. So in the context of the 3.6 billion that's in the pension fund, it is negligible. It's well below our materiality, but I do just need to draw that to your attention. So there's nothing else within this paper, Chair. I was pleased with how the pension fund audit went. We've cleared all our points on that. So as soon as we have to sign the county accounts at the same time as we signed the pension fund, so as soon as we've finished off the last part of the county accounts, then we will be signing them both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think the report's fairly clear and quite easy to follow. Now, have any members got any other questions they'd like to ask? Neil.
There we go. Thank you very much.
I think Neil, you're just a bit heavy-handed.
I must be.
Well, anyhow, Neil.
It's really just a general observation and perhaps me asking for a little bit more clarity. I note that this is the audit plan for the financial year ending March of 2022, and we are 15 days away from the end of the financial year 23. Can I just seek a little bit of clarification or just a reminder of where we expect or when we expect the external auditors plan for the financial year that is about to end in 15 days' time? Are we still looking that it will be this time next year? Are we hoping that it might actually be before the committee, before so close to the end of next financial year?
Mark, but just your thoughts on that, if I may.
Working for me now. Nice working for me now. So it's a good question. So I think there's a reality that the most accounts are later than they ought to be. So, and that comes from any number of issues. So you'll have seen you may have seen there were PAC hearings earlier today. Is it today? Yeah. So in terms of what's happening in the local audit market, and we've just issued a report on what's happening in the local government audit market, because there's a number of tensions that are causing accounts to be late and auditors to issue reports later than they would like. So the dynamics run in terms of, well, we do a lot of audit now. I think that was the comment for, earlier. So we do much more audit than we do previously. So we spend a lot of time on property. So that takes up a lot of our capacity. Some of the accounts that we see are poor, to be candid. So and then we're having to deal with the likes of Slough and Croydon, which you'll have seen in the public domain. So and that's kind of like, well, can't you just get over that? Well, the reality is no, because those audits absorb somewhere between 6 to 8 times the amount of audit resource that they ought to. So, and if you sort of multiply, it's not just 2, there's like 30, 40 of those bodies that are in that state. So there's a lot of audit work going on just because the regulator wants us to do a lot of work. There's a lot of poor performing authorities that are absorbing a lot of time. So we're, we continue to invest as a supplier. So local audit's not particularly popular because the pressures are quite extreme. So we train somewhere between 60 to 80 people. That's our graduate intake every year. So quite a lot get to become sort of qualified, and they're not staying because they can get paid more elsewhere. So what we've done under the latest contract is reset. So the audit fees are a lot higher. We're paying a lot more money. That will allow me to pay my people a lot more, which may allow me to keep them in the market. But we have deliberately reduced our market share so that I can catch up, and so that I can deal with, and I'm going to use the phrase, the failing authorities. So it's not as I would dearly like to deliver all of your audits by November. So that's not yet in my capability, because I need to reduce the level of work I'm doing. The regulator needs to change its attitude in terms of some of the work it's asking us to do, and I need to stabilise the audit team. So we will continue to perform as best I can. There are a lot of dynamics that are happening that need to settle down before I think we get back on track. And some of those responsibilities rest with local government.
Neil.
Thank you, Mark. And I appreciate the background that you've just given. And at the risk of being accused of teasing you, thank you for the context of the delivery of this report. Thank you.
I live this every day. No, seriously, I've done this all my life. Yeah, I've never been in this position where we're absolutely trying to do.
Yeah,
it's going to take some.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Jerry.
I'll ask the tongue-in-cheek question that arises out of your last answer then. So if your last answer was that you're substantially increasing our fee, which you are, normally if a client is paying a fee, they would have some say in the timescales. But the way we work in local government is we have to pay whatever we're asked to pay, and you can take as long as you like to do it, and we can't actually change anything. So is that not really turning the customer-supplier relationship on its head? And on the basis, as you said, that you're looking after or spending disproportionate amount of time on councils that predominantly issue 114 notices, had their audits been done earlier, might the problem of what's come up being avoided? Because there's no point having an audit if it's so far down the track that you can't stop problems happening. So if these things are happening because the audits are taking so long, what is the point of audits anyway?
Answer the last one first. So it's not my responsibility to govern every council in the country. So it's the responsibility of officers and members around that table. So there were some dreadful decisions made by Croydon and made by Slough. I will use those terms in a public meeting. So they made decisions that sort of fall so far outside normal procurement rules that they've effectively bankrupted themselves. So there are lots of PE people who could have done something different beforehand. So by necessity, audit's always sort of retrospective. So I'm sure the auditors were having those conversations at the time. So, but sometimes, if I may say so, councils don't listen. So in terms of, I think your question is the supply market broken in audit? I think is probably how I would frame it. Yeah, yes, it absolutely is. So there's a problem that, so under the last procurement contract, KPMG exited the market. So when the Audit Commission folded, obviously there was a bunch of people that exited with them. So what nobody foresaw was that level of, or that volume of people leaving, combined with the change in regulation, combined with the level of failure in local councils. So I think those things weren't managed particularly well. There's a reality that I had to step back into the contract. Otherwise, there's a proportion of authorities around the country that wouldn't have an auditor. So I think it's going to take a long while to stabilise. And the job of PSAA, and if I may say so, the LGA, is to make this attractive so that audit firms stay, because there is no auditor of last resort. And if somebody else steps out of the market, then you just won't have auditors. It's as serious as that.
Okay, so thanks for that, Mark. And I think it probably highlights the role of the Corporate Governance Committee in making sure that the risks are identified and dealt with fairly swiftly. Yeah, I absolutely understand exactly what you're saying. So thank you. Now, is there anybody else who's got any other questions? There isn't. Okay, and you have now definitely finished, Mark. You've got nothing to say. All right, I don't want to cut you short. No. All right, so the committee is asked to note the auditor's finding as set out in the annual report to approve the draft letters of representation. Can I ask, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So the date of the next meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee will be held on Friday, the 26th of May, 2023 at 10 o'clock. Now, we do have an item to deal with after this when we've gone into private session. But before we do, I believe this is Chris Tambini, our current Director of Corporate Resources. It's his certainly last corporate governance meeting, if not his last meeting. And just a note to thank him for his work over the years. And I think, if nothing else, this audit does show that compared to other councils, we are at the moment, or we were at the end of 2022 financial year, in a fairly sound position.
Yeah, this one we don't know.
And just congratulate Declan Keegan, who's taking over as Director of Corporate Resources from the 1st of June, and also a Section 151 officer. And I'm sure he'll keep us on the straight and narrow, make sure we don't do anything too rash.
I'm very happy about it.
Well, of course he's delighted. Your predecessor did that. You can blame it on your predecessor. Blame it on your predecessor.
More for a pound.
Yeah. No wonder he's retiring. Right. Okay. So that concludes today's meeting, the public section of the meeting. So the next item is to be considered in private. I therefore move that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 and 10 of Part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So once we've stopped the recording, we'll carry on.